Welcome back to our History 120 discussion of British North America and its colonization. Last time we talked about the Massachusetts Bay Colony and New York. Let's go ahead and keep on talking about this. Also, before I get started, I want to let you know I'm going to assign our first homework from Inquisitive this week. When you purchased your Norton textbook, you should have had information in there about accessing additional electronic tools for your class. This is the Inquisitive package. There are online study guides, etc. There's also a set of quizzes per chapter that we can take. I will email out the student set for this class after I post this lecture. Your first homework from Inquisitive will be due Sunday night, no later than 11:55 p.m., and it will be done on the Norton Inquisitive site. If you have any questions, make sure you drop me an email. I'll get things taken care of. But more information about your first email will go out tonight in the email I will send out then. So let's go ahead and talk about more colonization. Pennsylvania is kind of an interesting experiment in the colonization of North America. Parts of eastern Pennsylvania had started as New Sweden in the 1630s. This is essentially the area around Philadelphia, between Philadelphia, the Schuylkill River, and New Jersey. These areas had been New Sweden. Initially, there wasn't a lot of successful Swedish colonization. This will eventually come under English control in the 1660s. Now, William Penn is most famously going to be involved in the establishment of Pennsylvania. Penn's father was owed money by the British Crown. And Penn and his father were Quakers, which were not generally seen as an accepted religious group during the 17th century. As such, Penn wanted to capitalize on the Crown owing his family money by establishing a proprietary colony, a colony directly under his control. It was not a royal colony that was going to actually practice religious tolerance, especially for Quakers. This will happen in the 1680s. Again, proprietary colony. This means that Penn and a small group of people actually own the colony. It is not under British law, a piece of the British world. It is not controlled by a joint stock corporation, nor is it controlled by a royal governor. It is controlled by Penn. Penn will initially have good relations with the North Americans that he encounters and will establish a relatively recognizable democratic society for the governance of his colony. Places like Philadelphia, a town that we call it the city of brotherly love because that's literally what the name means, are established as a representation of goodwill and amity that's possible for all who come to Pennsylvania. Things won't always last like this. That's how the colony gets its start. Maryland will be another proprietary colony. Basically, as you can see, we're going down the eastern seaboard right now. This will be established by Lord Baltimore on land given to him. This is going to be a colony that is established for the freedom of Catholics in the New World. With the Protestant revolutions and everything that Henry VIII did and the 30 Years' War and the constant fighting and back and forth about religion that had gone on in Europe, Catholics ultimately lose their status in English society because of the English Reformation. In fact, Catholicism will be outlawed in England. To be caught as a priest or a practicing Catholic in 17th century England could mean your life. You could be jailed, you could be executed because you are not loyal to the king. You also lost political rights as a Catholic. So Lord Baltimore and his family will petition and be given land in the New World for Catholics to establish their own colony. It's good on one end because the next colony down the coast that we'll discuss is Virginia. Maryland will essentially act as a buffer zone between Virginia and the Dutch up in New Netherlands. That's great. It's a protective, defensive barrier between two different nationalities, although you really aren't going to worry about war between the Dutch and the English in North America. The Calvert family will control the colony until 1771, when it becomes a crown colony. There will be Protestant rebellions at times that challenge Catholic rule within the colony, but they will be unsuccessful by and large. It will revert time and again to its Catholic background. Maryland is also interesting. In some ways, it has a very semi-feudal settlement pattern as established there under the rules and beliefs of Catholicism that kind of match the patroon system. There are large landholders whose lands are worked in small parcels by tenants who basically have only feudal rights, seigneurial rights, as afforded them by the church and church law. They are seen as peasants. They are seen as less than citizens. They have no legal representation at first in the colony, nor do they have any legal rights in the colony at first. So Maryland is really an aberrant colonial establishment as far as that goes. One thing that's very important, though, as part of the Chesapeake Bay world, Maryland's economy is entirely driven by tobacco. In fact, it fairly copies very early on the success of Virginia tobacco and will not vary from that very much. Carolinas and Georgia will be established as a colony in the 1660s by Charles II, which is why it's called Carolina. Land will be given to 8 English nobles so they can establish their own essentially proprietary colony. In 1729, North and South Carolina will be separated out of this Carolina into their own distinct colonies and be created as crown colonies. Georgia will be settled in the 1730s, and while we by and large think of, Georgia, that was set up as a place for convicts, it wasn't a criminal colony like what we would associate Australia with. James Oglethorpe was a reformer. He did not believe in slavery. He did not believe in severe punishments, especially for lesser crimes like debt prisoners. We don't think about it much today, but it used to be in the 18th century. If you owed somebody money, including the government, they could put you in jail until your debts are paid off. And that's a debtor's prison. Oglethorpe's initial settlers were considered the worthy poor from debtors' prisons. These were people who had been caught in unfortunate situations, who had reputations for being hard workers. They just had gotten trapped into debt that they couldn't get out of. Debtors' prison, they weren't able to work off their debts in time. And so Oglethorpe took these worthy poor prisoners and brought them over to Georgia to have a clean start. They were going to have small farms. They were going to be able to labor there on their own farms. This was a very idyllic means of establishing a colony that really, unfortunately, couldn't keep up with slavery in the Carolinas. Slavery in the rice and indigo fields in the Carolinas was incredibly profitable, mainly because you bought your labor rather than having indentured servants or small holders do all the farm work. And in the 1750s, slavery will no longer be banned in Georgia, and we'll see a move away from small farms towards a plantation economy. Coastal regions in this time grew rice and indigo. These are human climate crops that were the most profitable in these regions. Ultimately, they'll be able to be replaced with tobacco and cotton. We haven't mentioned Virginia. Let's go back a step real quick while I talk about Virginia. I don't have a slide about it. Virginia is established in 1607 as an English outpost in the New World. After tales of 100 years of Spanish gold, silver, and jewels coming out from Central America, the English feel they can send a small group of male adventurers over to this new world and mine all this easy to reach gold, all these easy to reach jewels straight off the beach in Virginia. Unfortunately, they'll get there and there is no gold, there are no jewels, there's no silver in Virginia. What they do find, though, is an agricultural land that they can use to grow crops that they can potentially send back to pay off the Virginia Company, the joint stock corporation that founds Jamestown, the first English colony. In the 1620s, tobacco will be introduced into Jamestown, and this will change the world because this is the first truly profitable North American crop. And that crop will very quickly drive Virginia out of debt and create the first great wealthy colony in the New World. One thing we need to talk about is how, not just in their creation, but in other ways, we see a difference in development between northern colonies and southern colonies. And this is going to be based around towns. New England sets up in such a way that life is dominated by the town. And you would then go out and work your fields on the outside of town. Everybody would live in town. This provides protection, it provides community. This is in a very early map of Boston in the 1720s. What we can see here, we can see the Commons area where you would keep livestock. This was community-owned pasturage and area that everybody could use. People are going to live in the town sections, and then they're going to walk out towards their agricultural fields on the outside of town in order to work. This is basically a model of agriculture that copies life in rural England. You live inside the town. The town is surrounded by farm fields that are worked during the day by farmers who then go back into town at night for hearth and home. The town is governed through town meetings where, while you might have an elective council that rules, the average person is able to stand up and make suggestions or air grievances, find things for the town to look into. It's a relatively egalitarian model of town leadership. Everybody has their voice in town meeting. Everybody has the ability to have an equal say before the town board or the county board. This is still actually practiced as a form of municipal government in New England today. That egalitarian system also works great for the defense. You can abandon your farm fields and move into a highly defensible town area where everybody will stand up for everybody else, and you're living next door to other people rather than being isolated as family units that might be miles from other families on the frontier. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony, everybody was expected to attend Sunday services, religious services. If you did not, you could be fined by the civil government. There's no freedom from religion in the early Massachusetts Bay Colony or the early New England towns. You had to go to church if you wanted to have political rights. If you didn't go to church, you could be fined, you could be jailed, you could have a reputation that was tarnished because everybody else was at church. Where were you? We also see emphasis put on education in early New England towns. Why is this? You can't read the Bible, which is a tenet of Protestant religious faith, if you don't have an education or enough education to be literate. In order to be saved, in order to be a church member, and in order to understand the Word of God, you have to be able to read. And so we see a real emphasis on education here as a part of the religious attitudes of these New England towns. In the South, we see a much different form of settlement. We see settlement that is very much dispersed. It is there are major cities. They tend to be coastal in the South. This is because they are port cities. They are trading ports where for people to come in and boats to come in and have trade take place with the old world, between the old world and the new world. As such, people have been, as a tobacco culture, as a plantation style culture, people have been given grants of hundreds, if not thousands, of acres of land on a personal level, which scatters and spreads out the people who work the land, and especially the landowners. So very few people actually live in these towns unless you make money as a trader, as a boat captain, if you're involved in the maritime trades somehow. If you're not involved in the maritime trades or the services people might come to town for, you live on a very scattered network of farms that range between the coast and the Appalachian Mountains. By and large, this is a riverine culture. And what I mean by that is rivers played a vital role in early transportation networks. It is well, let's put it this way. There's no established roads. There's no deep infrastructure for building and maintaining roads in this world. So it's very hard to transport goods over land. And if you look at this map of the coastal Carolinas, you notice a large number of river inlets and coastal river and waterways that go all the way to the mountains. As such, if you can get access, if you can get your crop to a spot on a river where a boat can come in, you can then have easier, faster transportation by water down to the coast than if you were to try to put everything on horse-drawn or ox-drawn carts. The economic and political control of these southern colonies really falls into the hands of the large landowners, people like the Byrds of Virginia. The more land you have, the more money you have, the greater status you have in society or in Southern society. They can hire private tutors for their children. And so they're not going to invest in schools. They're not going to invest in road networks because their plantation is right on the river. Why should I pay for somebody else to have access to markets? That doesn't benefit me. It's very much a feudal pattern or a pattern that's very similar to the land holding patterns and beliefs in England. More power for the wealthy. If you are poor, know your place. There is no equality or egalitarianism in southern settlements. Where there are road networks, that's where you'll see crossroads stores established. The few churches that are built in the South aren't built in every town, but they're built at the side of crossroads where two roads intersect. That makes it easy for people to find these churches. It makes it easier for people to get to these churches. They're going to be smaller in number and in size. And what we also need to keep in mind geographically is we have a divide here known as the divide based on the fall line or the highlands. If you've ever heard like the high country or something thrown about like that, states like the Carolinas, there's a low country which hugs the coast. It is generally the best land. It is the most fertile land. It is well watered. It's hot. It's humid. It's full of disease carrying mosquitoes. But it's the best agricultural land because soil nutrients over eons have washed down from the mountains. If you look at the map, we have some strings of mountains and hills here illustrated in the coastal Carolina. Between those hills and the coast are the lowlands. Those hills, between those hills which are before the Appalachians, they actually represent the highlands or the uplands. This is above the fall line. The fall line is where we see the dip down towards the coast and where the waters start rushing to coastal areas rather than through the highlands between the hills, etc. The highlands are where the poor tend to settle. It is not as good agriculturally. The soil's rocky, it's thin. The nutrients have poured down to the coast for eons now. It is marginal land for a marginal people. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap that up here. When we come back next time, we'll talk about systems of labor in America and how this is the 400th anniversary of the most infamous. I hope everybody has a great day, and I will send out an email with the assignment instructions tonight.